they're really good examples if you want to know how different countries transition from maybe a command economy to the mixed economy, including capitalism, but they certainly aren't something that I'm going to test you on, okay? And the quiz I'll make shorter because I got a few grumbles about it being 26 questions. So this next one will for sure be under 20. It's probably going to be closer to like 15 to 18 questions. And then we'll do Unit 3 starting tomorrow with the American Free Enterprise System. And that's where we're going to do an activity together in class. And then next week we'll finish up Chapter 3 and we'll have our first unit test. I'll try and get that unit test up like Friday because I have some work time on Friday. And then you guys can start working at it at your own pace. It won't be one that you can take over until you get all the right answers. But if you do get it in on time, I'll let you guys retake it if it doesn't go well. So just know that that's coming up for next week. And then we'll start already on supply and demand before Christmas. We'll see how far we get, but what I'd really like to do, that unit's a little bit longer, but I might break it into, we just do supply and demand, have a summative before Christmas time, so that it's not something you have to remember over the break and then come back to. Does that sound good? Okay, so here we go. Oops, I gotta present here. Okay, so today we're talking about this global transition to capitalism. Well, what the heck is that? Basically, we talked about capitalism as a system where individuals are able to own businesses, groups can own corporations. Everything is, not everything, but there's a lot of things that are free market, meaning that people decide on what they want to buy, what they want to produce, how much they want to produce, and for whom they want to produce. So citizens are in charge of that versus the government being in charge of that. And when you look at history, hey, just one second, guys. If you want to chat, you guys can go like out there, but yeah, sorry. Okay, so once again, we're on Wednesday. So finish reading the lessons, and then I have pages 1 through 5. And for those of you that might be reading the PDFs, it's the first couple of pages of the PDF, so you don't have to read all the way to the end. When it starts talking about, I think it's Russia and China, that's where you guys can stop. I'll find it. Hold on. So if you do or are reading the PDF guides, you will stop on page 4.
You can multiply 2
before you get to Russia.
Times 2.
Okay?
You can multiply 2 times 2, and that equals 4, and then 4 times 2, and that equals 0.
Okay. All right. How does an economic system help a society deal with the fundamental problems of scarcity? That's the big question for this unit. So, suppose you're a company that sells smartphones. If the stores in which your phones are sold can't stock enough phones to meet customer demand, what would you do? So I need some shout outs from you guys. What would you guys do if you sold phones and they kept running out? Would you produce more phones or fewer phones?
I would produce more phones.
You'd produce more phones. Yeah, that makes sense. Would you change the price? Maybe. Yeah, I mean, you could probably charge more if they're selling that fast. You might be able to charge more and make more money. Or you might charge the same amount. I don't know that in this situation you'd charge less. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about supply and demand. But this is just something that somebody in a free market system can choose. You can choose as the owner of the store that sells smartphones how many phones you want to sell. Okay, so we're going to look at capitalism today. And the first thing we're going to do is watch just a quick video on the Silk Road in China. This is in your online book too, if you want to access it. But we are going to watch this today. It's only like 2 minutes.
Wang Yinshan wants to sell raisins to the United States.
一个在世界上
The US is the most advanced country in the world, she says. Why wouldn't I want to break into your market? We found Wang in the remote desert town of Tufan as we followed the 2,000-year-old Silk Road across western China. Once a trading post on the Silk Road, today it is one of the least developed parts of the country. But even here, the entrepreneurial spirit is blooming again. The Silk Road was a time of unprecedented economic openness for China, bringing silk, paper, and tea to the West in exchange for gold, glassware, and horses. Today, as China is again opening up, the capitalist ethos is spreading to its remotest regions. Capitalism turns up on the strangest places in China, even on the backs of camels. In the oasis town of Dunhuang, we met Li Wenqing, a camel driver who's exploiting the frontier spirit the best way he knows. When I had some savings, he says, I was able to buy the camels, so I started my own business. Now Li offers 4-day camel safaris across the desert to adventurous travelers for $50 per person per day. Enough, he says, to make a decent living. Our 2,200-mile journey ended in Kashgar, a largely Muslim town on the edge of Central Asia, where we met Alan Johnson from Detroit. After 4 years studying in China, he and his wife Larissa decided to open a coffee shop in this ancient city.
It's quite a welcoming environment, and for us to run businesses, it's a nice environment.
Johnson has discovered what many Chinese already knew. The lessons of doing business that were learned along the Silk Road may be old, but they certainly haven't been forgotten.
Okay. Oops, sorry.
Wang Yinshan wants to sell raisins to the United States.
All right. So that's just an example of where capitalism is moving into China. China used to be more communist than it is now. So people are starting businesses along that old Silk Road. And you can see on the map there that Silk Road was, 1,000 years ago. And now towns are cropping up and people are basically moving to capitalism. And capitalism is where people are able to own their businesses and things like that. And, China is one of the biggest producers in the world. So I think it is the biggest producer in the world. Okay. The transition of communist and socialist economic systems to capitalism has been the dominant economic trend of our lifetime. But there are definitely pros and cons of that. So remember, communist means that there's a central government or king or monarch that basically runs the whole country. And the theory is that they would provide enough for everybody in their country to be successful, have jobs, have homes, have food. Though in reality, that's never actually been the case. Socialist systems would be a little bit less strict, where there's a central government that kind of runs everything, but then there are some people that own their own businesses. But even highly socialist companies like Sweden, where they have free healthcare, free education, free college education, the government actually runs things like liquor stores and gun shops and things like that. So they're socialist when we compare them to the United States. At the same time, there's a lot of capitalism there. There's a lot of free enterprise there. Okay, so here are some of the pros. Capitalism is powerful for generating wealth. People are going to make money if they can have their own businesses. Capitalism in countries around the world, including Japan, Germany, and the US, have greatly increased their productivity and experienced economic growth due to capitalism. So when you run your own business, you want it to be efficient, and you have an invested interest in that. So let's say I'm just going to even say something big like a car manufacturing company. I want my employees to be treated well so that they work hard and they produce cars at a good rate. And if I give them a good salary, they're more likely to work harder than if they're treated poorly. And that's something that you guys, that can be controlled if you're the owner of a company. If a government owns everything, it's really hard to control for those things. Plus, there's not as much of an interest in it, because if you own everything in a country, you're not going to care what the individuals are doing in a small town in southern Wisconsin. And then people that have capitalistic countries generally have a higher standard of living. And it's giving me a hard time to go on. Okay. So look at this picture once. This is somewhere in Asia. What options do you think these shoppers have that a nation with a command economy would not experience? So look at that store. Are there a lot of people there? I'm hoping you're all saying yes. Do they have a lot of choice in what they're purchasing?
No.
Well, I think they do. Look at the shoes behind them. I mean, there's all sorts of shoes on, it looks like a shoe store, actually. There's all kinds of different shoes on every different shelf there. So somebody that moves from a command economy where there might only be 10 different kinds of shoes available to a capitalistic free enterprise system, they can have 1,000 different shoes available. So that's just something to look at. And yeah, it is, I think that was Jessica that answered. It's kind of hard to look at that picture and see what's going on there, but just know that in capitalism, a nation can provide a lot more choices for its people. There can be bad things though. So although media, news, television, etc. has connected our world, it has also made many want the wealth they see through the eyes of the media. Unfortunately, capitalism doesn't always meet the economic and social goals of the nation, and the transition can be hard. So if you talk to anybody from different parts of the world, when they look at America, what they see is Hollywood. They see New York City. They see all these big bustling cities and think that everybody in America has money, has cars, has nice houses. And that's not an exaggeration. I've traveled pretty extensively, and the worldview of America is very different than the reality of America. We all know that not everybody lives in big cities, drives big cars, has a lot of money. But that is what the other world sees in America. So when their country moves to capitalism, it's not always meeting what they see on TV or on the internet. So that's definitely something that's a con of the move to it. So just understand that. So when a country moves from a command economy, from capitalism to private, you're moving to private property or privatization. So you're taking government or state-owned property and selling it, giving it to individuals, which can be great. So think about Russia, and there were back during World War II, all the farming was state-owned. I mean, when you say state here, it's the government, was government-owned, and people were starving. So eventually, it was sold to private citizens. There were stock options for the big ones. If you guys know anything about the stock market, that means that people could invest in it. And people were able to take those farms and actually make money out of them. So that can be a really good thing. Entrepreneurs and private ownership results in better care of properties, because if you own it individually, you're going to take more pride in it and take more care of it than if it's somebody else's. And then this just explains that thing I was telling you. Once again, some problems. Generally, when you're looking at going from a command economy or socialism to capitalism, the government feels like there's going to be a loss of power, and there generally is. So sometimes that move from socialism or communism to capitalism is the result of war or revolts or things like that. Citizens have to learn to make their own decisions, take initiative, interpret prices in free markets. Their incentives change. So let's imagine you worked in Russia during the time period when there was really not a lot of capitalism there. And let's say you worked at a restaurant and you worked 50 hours a week, you got paid minimum wage, And it didn't matter how good you did, you're never going to move up in that business. You're never going to be able to be a manager. You just have to do your job in order to live. Sometimes when people go to a capitalistic society or free market, and now an individual owns that fast food restaurant, and you're not pulling your weight, you're going to get fired. Whereas in the past, you didn't get fired. That was your job and that's what you did. So that change can be hard for people. The other thing is that it's expensive sometimes to do that. So there can be unemployment, economic instability, and people don't like it. Or there's unrest because the government used to be taking care of something they're not taking care of anymore. Just give me a minute, Trevor. So there can be a lot of problems with that move, but in general, after time, it's a good thing. I know this might be a little bit hard to see, and this is also something you can look at in your online book, but this just shows economic systems per capita GDP. GDP is gross domestic product. So this is per person how much a country is producing. And you can see the United States is number 4 on that list. So our country puts out a lot. At the very bottom, you have, oops, sorry, now you can't see it. You have North Korea, which is the closest thing to a command economy in the world, a communist economy in the world. And they are also the lowest GDP in the world. And that's just something to know that with capitalism comes wealth, if it's done correctly. And then you can kind of look at, so you see China is down here at the bottom. China is at transition, so they're still per person not making a ton. There's a lot of people in China. It's the biggest nation in the world. I would imagine eventually China's going to move up here. So, and I know some of this might not make a lot of sense right now. We're going to be talking more about GDP as we go on. But I think you can understand the numbers, and the countries that are making a lot of money are more modernized than the ones down the bottom here. Okay, another problem with that move to free enterprise is pollution. So if you look at the map, that's level of pollution at ground level. So the darker red, the unhealthier the air. And if you, some of this, so you've got the desert here in Africa, that's going to add to pollutants like dust and sand in the air. But if you look at some of these other major countries that are moving towards capitalism, it's not necessarily good for the environment. So that's just something to know also, that that's another con. Part of it is industrial growth. So there's more factories putting more junk in the air. Okay, that's it for today. Do you guys have questions? Like I said, this is like a shortened version of that lesson 3 because I don't think you need to know. You can read it if you're interested in the economy of other nations, but I'm not gonna test you on it. So does anybody have any questions?